And it is at this point in time that we get into what I call the main event, where we get into a conversation with our guests for today. And today I have two very eminent gentlemen with me, and two men that I can proudly say are from the community where I grew up. Well, one is from the same parish, right? Because as one of them will tell you, he came from Belvidere, one of the most notable estates in St. John's, and the other one came from the Lance, in the heart of God. So much so, he's written a book about it. But we'll be getting into more of that. But the pleasure is mine right now to welcome to GEM FM and to the platform of the Comfort Zone for today, the 26th edition. Today, February 6th, Bob Marley's birthday, the pre-Grenada independence, Mr. Herman Hall and Mr. Collis Tony DeCoteau. Good afternoon to you, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon to you. And to get started, I want to just share a little bio, just share with our listeners a little background on those two gentlemen. Now, Mr. Herman Hall, he was born and raised in Belvedere Estate, as I said earlier on, in Grenada. He lived there until 1967, when he immigrated to New York. He is the publisher, editor of Everybody's, the Caribbean American magazine. Mr. Hall was part of the White House press that accompanied President Ronald Reagan on his 1982 trip to Jamaica and Barbados. Mr. Hall, he loves history, especially oral history, and considers it a hobby. He is working on some more books in that regard, and I expect he's going to tell us something about that. Through Herman Hall Communications, Inc., Mr. Hall produces and promotes Caribbean theater, calypso, and soca concerts. Okay, so Belvedere Estate, Fedon's house, Grenada, Voices of the Past. It was published on February 9, 2016. Okay, so that's a book that was published by Mr. Hall. Okay, and it speaks about rebellion, insurrection, revolt, executions, religion, maroons, slavery, ghosts, coffee, plantation, nutmegs, and cocoa. All add up to the spicy flavor, high drama, and creative tension of Belvedere Estate, Fedon's house. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. And as you know, Fedon House, it really brings to life and celebrates the 1795 to 1796 insurrection, that is known as Fedon's Revolution or Fedon's Rebellion. And so much so that what is called Fedon Camp up at Belvedere is one of our major heritage sites. So once again, good afternoon to you, Mr. Hall. And is there anything of note that you would like to add to this short bio by way of introduction?
Well, no, I just want to say good afternoon. I want to wish all of our folks from Gouyave, as well as the entire nation of Grenada, Carriacou, and Fiji Martinique, happy independence. And it's funny enough that you started with the music of Bob Marley, because
that was deliberate.
Okay, today is his birthday. I was very fortunate to say that Bob and myself were friends. And I actually did several interviews with Bob. I was obviously at the funeral. I knew Rita, the children, they were very, very small. So in our magazine, Grenada's birthday, anniversary of independence, and Bob Marley's birthday are always in the annual Global Caribbean calendar of everybody's. And I always used to kid with Bob that he is, I think, younger than me, because I'm April 26th, and he is older than me, and he's February 6th.
Okay.
And we were, so Bob, in other words, would have been 76 today.
Okay. Well, actually, when we spoke about you coming on the program, that was one of the things that you said to me. Oh, it's Bob Marley's birthday.
Oh.
You know, so I had to make sure that I factor that into today's presentation.
Did you remember that?
Yes, I had to factor that in. And then, accompanying Mr. Herman Hall, we have a gentleman who I refer to affectionately as Uncle Tony, because it's a family, all his nieces and nephews, and so on, and grandnieces and nephews are people that I am very much acquainted with. As a little boy, I used to be going to his mother's shop. That's where we did all our grocery and did our credits and everything. Miss Idora, or Mao, as we called her, and I guess you'll be hearing more about that because she's referenced in the book, A Place Called Gouyave. And Mr. Collis Tony DeCoteau, he was born and raised in Gouyave, Grenada. In 1959, he attended high school in the Grenada Boys Secondary School, GBSS. After graduation, he taught elementary school, which we call primary school here, in his hometown in St. John's RC School. That's the primary school I went to. Wanting to further his education, he migrated to Hamilton, Canada, where he obtained his bachelor's degree. And at McMaster's University in 1971, Mr. DeCoteau, he moved in 1979 with his wife and two daughters to Miami, where, and he's among those who introduced the word processor, precursor, to the computer, to the business community of Miami. So, I mean, we have some very innovative people out there, there's so many Grenadians doing such great things out there, and I expect he's going to tell us a little more about that. But to tell you about his book, A Place Called Gouyave, it's a boy's recollection of the colorful and lovable characters of his hometown, where he says, people's mistakes are not lifelong condemnation. Now, that book was published in January of 2012. And it says A Place Called Gouyave is a fantastic memoir that has been penned by Mr. DeCoteau, and he has done a masterful job. Now, that's one of the reviews that's out there, in capturing and committing to paper the memories and the stories of the colorful and lovable characters during his boyhood in his hometown Gouyave. And some people consider this book to be very nostalgic for them, reminding them of their days as their childhood days in the town of Gouyave. Good afternoon to you, Uncle Tony, and welcome to the Comfort Zone. Welcome to GMFM. Is there anything of note that we need by way of introduction?
Really done an excellent job. I don't see anything other to add. I mean, if there is anything I'd like to say is that I'm still in awe of you, because I remember yourself and your bigger brother Chester, who, as I told you before, I thought you were Chester.
Okay, right.
Because one year on Labor Day in Brooklyn, this person ran out from the band. He was jumping in the band. He ran out to me and said, "Hey, Teacher Tony." Now, I haven't seen this guy in any number of years. To this day, I'm not sure if it is you or whether it was Chester. Well, so I'm just talking about Little Ray.
Yes, Little Ray.
Who you turn out to be. So, big up to you, as the Jamaicans would say.
Okay.
Yes. Anyway, well, based on what Ray had already said, perhaps I should ask, why am I here? I am Mrs. Idora DeCoteau. Everybody used to call her Ma'am. Back in 1984, she died. So it's quite a while, but nonetheless, she left an impression in Gouyave that people to this day, even young children who died, who were not born as yet, still said, "Oh, I heard that name, Miss Idora," and of course, referring to my father, they used to call him Pikey John. So they must have done something to capture these people's memory and have it passed on. In that spirit, I believe I should read a quote from my book.
Sure, go right ahead.
I said, paraphrasing the bard, the mighty sparrow, whose folks knew that without an education, we, their children, would continue to live our lives in pure misery, and indeed would be much better off dead. I'm sure you could recognize that song, those lines in his famous song called Education.
Education, yes.
Right. I am adding to it. It's required of us, their descendants, to never disrespect nor forget the degradation, trials, and tribulations they endured to make our lives better. That much is owed to them. Failing to do so is the ultimate insult to their memories. That's my mantra. And basically, that's the way I try to live. I believe in the things that I always believe. I remember a friend of mine from Gouyave, as a matter of fact, he's related to the singing Sandra that just died. Right. He said to me, they used to call me Dashi back home. He said, well, Dashi, your voice hasn't changed at all. So I said, why should it? I am from Gouyave, the lands. People know me. He said, well, I've heard so many others with a twang that did not suit them in the way that I thought of them. So congratulations to you. I said, no, you don't have to congratulate me. I am who I am. I'm true to myself. And that's all I'm asking anybody, and the younger ones, to be true to yourself. That's basically it. If you want to know why I wrote my book, or you would ask questions about it, I'm here to answer.
Yeah, we definitely are going to get to that. But if I may, you asked the question why you are here. You are here because this program seeks to highlight, seeks to bring to the fore, seeks to present to our Grenadian people individuals who are out there in the diaspora, who are doing things that are noteworthy, who have done things that are noteworthy, who continue or have been flying the Grenadian flag proudly, right? And have contributed to the development of the country where they presently live in a significant way. As you speak about education, they've lifted the education level, and they have not become wards of the state, but they have become people who help to develop and help to grow the country where they live. They make a mark that Grenada can be proud of. And not only people in the diaspora, but people who live at home and are doing things that are noteworthy. And that's why I would have had, people from the sporting fraternity, people who have written books just like you have done, and so on, and other individuals who contribute to the conversation relating to the development of our country. So that's the reason why you are here, because as I just was able to read, you have done things that are noteworthy, and you have been able to share at least, an excerpt from your book, and we are going to be hearing more of that in the conversation. So that's why you are here, Uncle Tony.
Okay, so let me just interject. I believe in the audience are relatives of mine that I have no idea who they are. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Just as an example, I remember a lady named Mrs. Canis Modest Alexis, very famous lady in the New York area. She invited me to a function, and I was supposed to be one of the featured people there. And the DJ was playing music, and it was so good. I turned to the lady sitting beside me and said, "Who is this person? Do you know him?" She said to me, "That's your nephew." I said, "Nephew?" She was referring to my niece, Muriel Maslin, her son, and his name is Gary. And the woman continued by saying, "And by the way, I am his wife." the point I'm making is that because of immigration, we get so fractured, we don't keep in touch with each other. So sometimes somebody might be sitting next to you, might very well be your nephew, might very well be your brother. Well, no, I don't have brother. That kind of brother. Might be a nephew or some close relative and you don't know. So when I ask, what am I doing here? I think of my mother. Who is my mother? Ma, as everybody call her. I have no reason to think back when I was a little boy that somebody would think I'm worthy to be on a program like this. Because I used to think that to be on a program like this, and Mr. Hall would support me, one, you must be white. Two, you must be highly, highly, highly successful. And I'm not white, I'm not highly successful. But as I said, because I honor my parents, I think there are some things that I have to do, not because I can do it. For example, I wrote a book in honor of my mother as well. Okay. When myself, I called upon some people from Gouyave, and we extended the cemetery shed. I don't know if you guys recall the days when the cemetery shed, if Lacroix gets in there, the horse alone is too big for the shed. So we got, throughout the diaspora, I know a lot of people, and therefore I call on them to contribute. And believe me, we were not in any way assisted by government. We built it ourselves through contributions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we did it. In addition to that, we added a toilet that you would see attached to the shed.
Yes, yes.
Since I'm going to use a friend of mine term, since I was a little boy, I always thought that it used to turn me off, really, when I see the old elderly woman wanting to use the bathroom, having to go in the bushes and hide during a funeral. I always said, I hope one day I'll be in a position to make a difference. And I'm glad I was able later in adult life to do that. That's why we built the toilet and the extension of the shed. Okay. So in short, those of you who are watching, I'm not special, I'm just like you. One day you might be here too. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yes, well, thank you for that. I remember when that project was done, and I know it was done with assistance from Grenadians in the diaspora. I'm very well aware of that. I wasn't aware that you, as an individual, was associated with it, but I knew that it was people in the diaspora. And that's how critical our diaspora is to us, and we need to engage with our diaspora in a more constructive and cohesive way, going forward, that can contribute to our overall development in a more meaningful way, not just the remittances that come home, on an annual basis. But let me get back to Mr. Hall at this juncture. And before we get into the book and everything else, Mr. Hall, I mentioned that piece where you were the one who made that trip with President Reagan back in 1982 to Jamaica and so on. How did Herman Hall become, happen to be, part of such an eminent team traveling to the Caribbean back in 1982? How did that come about?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't see it in that light. I will have to say it came about beginning St. John's Anglican School. Or this is where you got your basics. It began perhaps with the man who adopted me, Frederick Adams, the late Frederick Adams in Belvedere. All those wonderful stories. I mean, always aim for the highest. I did not, I was a journalist, still practice it. And I've been at several high-profile events since then. I would have inauguration in January if we did not have the COVID and if we did not have the foolishness that took place on January 6th. Simple as that. But before I do that, I want to say something. And I may sound emotional in how grave she may be saying thank you for saying it. And I want to refer to Sandra John. Those of you, I think Mr. DeCoteau mentioned a while ago.
Sandra, yeah.
Most of you know her as singing Sandra. Others know as Sandra Millington. But her last name, or her maiden name, John. And I'm referring to Mr. John on the lands. This
On New Street.
I would not know. But Mr. John lived in the back street.
On New Street.
Right, I don't know.
Opposite to relatives of yours, the Harracks.
Exactly, the Harracks.
Yes.
Right. So, and the reason why I'm saying so, it's in the, and we should learn our basic history. I think one of the problems with Caribbean history in general is that we always go look towards London and the colonial powers, the former colonial powers, for our history. That is really written from a European perspective. Only little basic history, sometimes we tend to ignore it and as insignificant. But the first time I actually heard about the name Africa was actually from our great-granduncle. And we're going back now to maybe 1953. They used to have something in, I guess, in the British Empire called May 24th. It used to be a big public holiday in Grenada. I think it used to be called Empire Day.
May Day.
Called 24th May.
24th May, that's right.
Huh? Yeah.
24th May, yeah.
Right, we school children have to dress up. Now, once or twice, Mr. John did not allow his sons to participate in that. And then, but in 53, I would have been about 7, 8, but in 55, I only was between 9 and 10. And just before Hurricane Janet, a few months before Hurricane Janet, Princess Margaret made a visit to Grenada. And it was the biggest thing in Grenada. Everybody, public hall, all roads led to St. George's. But one man did not allow his children to go, and he gave the rationale. Because he thought, and that was Mr. John, he felt his rationale, I'm a little kid and I'm hearing what the adults are saying, that that Europeans have exploited Grenadians or the people in the various islands. Why are we celebrating a European monarchy? And when we have great civilization in Africa, everybody thought, oh, it was so awful of Mr. John. All the school children are going to St. George's, including me, and his poor children have to remain there. But then, so years later now, I have no idea who is Sandra, except she's on my shows. I mean, we've been on several, she has worked for me several times. And I've always said to people, and I'm not kidding, that she's the best artist I've ever worked with. Now, I managed Shadow for 47 years. Nobody knows that I was Shadow's manager. As a matter of fact, when Shadow came to go out for Fisherman's Birthday many years ago, I remained right here, arranged everything. It was I who arranged everything. I was managed for 47 years. And even though I was with Shadow for all those years in all his business, yet the greatest entertainer I've ever worked with was Sandra. And then I understand, so now people who know her lyrics, who knows that she rejects smart calypso, who knows that if you're a calypso writer and you give her any trashy stuff, she's not going to perform it. And for those of who, again, who understand her lyrics, how meaningful they are, how uplifting they are. And some people saw Sandra as a little bit militant, but she was not really. She was just progressive. And because she really sung about the African past, you know, with the drumming and so forth, people thought, oh, well, maybe she's only Afro-Trinidadian. Her best friend was an Indian person. And when she got to know, well, you know, years ago we had chatted, she knew my aunt, Louisa Albanara, who just died, his grandmother. She knew all of them. But what I'm really saying to you, singing Sandra, as we, you know, we mourn her passing, she was reared. She was not all. She was born in Trinidad. That came down in the veins of the Johns from the Lands Gulf. Finally, on that, there is a gentleman whose funeral I attended yesterday from Florida, yesterday evening. Most maybe the older Grenadians may know him is Teacher Gentle.
Teacher Gentle. I knew Teacher Gentle. He taught at the Irish school during
exactly. Yeah. So unfortunately, yesterday I attended his funeral. And
somebody had told me he had passed.
Right, and his ashes is going to be sent back to Grenada, and I guess will be kept at the cemetery in Douglaston. So I just want for people who knew Gentle Alexis, we knew each other very well because I'm coming on from Belvedere. He lived in Florida, and for years, we would walk sometime with other school children. We meet each other at Florida Junction, we walk back. And so he was a very, very nice person, and a great citizen of Gouyave, Florida, and the parish of St. John's.
May I add something, Ray?
Yes, go right ahead.
Actually, as Mr. Hall was speaking, or Herman as I prefer to call him, because, by the way, Mr. Hall and myself were schoolmates in the TBS, so I was ahead of him, but nonetheless, we go way back when. Mm-hmm. And when he was talking about managing Shadow and Oliver Samuel, the famous Jamaican artists. Mm-hmm. I remember I was in a concert in Brooklyn. Don't recall if it was a Sparrow show or whatever the show was, but somebody told me that Herman is the promoter of the show. So I scratched my head and said, which Herman are you referring to? Is it Herman from Gouyave? The boy that I used to go to high school with that did not show any particular desire for calypso or for that matter anything. Herman was just Herman. And here he is doing what he's doing. And I was further told that Herman used to be a featured speaker or host, I guess, on a radio station called WBLS. Am I right?
And WLIB, both. You both right.
All right.
WBLIB and WBLIB.
When I was told that, again, it blew my mind. Why am I saying that? Because never mind where you came from, sooner or later, the true essence of you will shine if you keep to yourself, true to yourself, always. Mr. Hall is that person. While you were speaking, he mentioned, heard him mention the story about Princess Margaret and Mr. Percy John. That's how we knew.
Exactly, Percy John.
Again, I referenced Mr. Percy John in A Place Called Gouyave, not because I was focusing on him as much as during Hurricane Janet, a lady named is Daphne Glean. I think she is the sister of Sakala Glean. I believe that's correct. But nonetheless, she had a little baby in her arm during the hurricane, and the wind was so strong that the baby fell out from her arm into the water because the Gouyave River just overflowed through her Gouyave. The next morning, they found the body underneath the steps where Mr. Percy John had his sweet drink factory. So when I heard him talk about Mr. Percy John not allowing his sons to go to hear Princess Margaret, I realized, wow, I too am in an esteemed company, because years later, my mother went to England and I was in charge of my mother's home, and we had my nieces, one of them being Maureen, living with us. Naturally, I'm the one to say whether they would or they would not go anywhere. And I couldn't be certain if it was Princess Margaret or for that matter Queen Elizabeth, but one of those English royalty came in Grenada. And I was a teacher then. I said, I'm not going. And I told her she's not going. Well, needless to say, neither of us went. Because my argument is, my mother went to England. None of the royalties came to say hi to my mother. What made them so much more elevated than she is, that I am required to go to say hello to them. I just, and that's the connection I just from what Mr. Hall is saying. I'm in good company with Mr. John. I didn't know the story of Mr. John, but there it is.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And you were not going to say hello to her. You were going to go and stand in the hot sun with a little flag to be able to wave a ship. And she would wave with a glove.
And probably faint in the hot sun.
And probably faint in the hot sun.
Why did you go through that? That was my argument.
I know. But unfortunately, 47 years afterwards, although we're a politically independent country, we still hold on to the coattails of the colonial masters in very many ways. And we revel in all of the colonial accolades that are dished out. Some of them are being dished out at this point in time while we celebrate independence. Anyway, Mr. Hall, let me just continue with you and let's begin to get into those books. Fedon, yeah, Belvidere. You say that it has an exciting history told by the laborers of the 1950s of the rebellion in 1795 that was led by Fedon and so on. Tell me about these experiences living on the estate and getting that oral history that you speak of during those times.
Okay, well, first of all, we should clarify something. Mm-hmm. Since we, and especially today's generation, are robbed of our history, a lot of us up to today believe that the Fedon's rebellion was restricted to one area. The Fedon's rebellion, by today's standard, would have been international news. It would have been the top news of the day. The Fedon's rebellion extended from Petit Martinique, Carrefour, and the entire island of Grenada in 1795. So we first have to remove that veil that it was restricted to Belvedere Estate. The rebellion, obviously, it was done by French-speaking mulattoes who were looking for their political rights. Now, a lot of stuff on the rebellion also is hearsay. And I should add that that first book I gave was really the second book, but I presented first. What I tried to do in the first book you have was to show, which was basically a tribute to the people of Belvedere Estate. Ever since I was maybe 2 or 3, or maybe 3 or 4, my earliest memory, very, very early memory, and that has to be at least about 4 years old, I heard of Fedon. I even thought, as I said in the book, that this man was alive because people were speaking of Julian Fedon. So in a sense, I have been researching Julian Fedon ever since I was about 3 or 4. And there came a man, his image I could still see. Now I'm about 4 or 5. And when this man came to Belvedere, I remember the laborers going to him, or you hear up with him. In adult life as a teenager, I came to know him, and he's Father Divas. But getting back to the book and the Fedon's Rebellion, this first book I did was like trying to substantiate what the laborers of Belvedere Estate in the 50s, the 60s, and obviously before that said about Fedon. They kept the spirit alive. For the world, a lot of people believe in Grenada that to read something about Fedon, you have to read about what the scholars have said, what they wrote. And about 80% of what the scholars have wrote is sheer nonsense, or just basically cause and effect, the cause of the rebellion and the result of it. It's not really hardcore day-to-day what went on during the rebellion of itself. But the laborers of Belvedere in the 40s and 50s, and as I said before, they kept that spirit. It was oral history. So I tried in this book as a youth showing what these laborers were saying as a youth, how it is actually true. So I tried to prove it, and I gave it, and I wanted to make it a nice, amusing book. So it's to make it humorous. Growing up on the estate. I think there's a couple of publications in London that said it was a sort of autobiography or some sort of memoir of myself, but it was not. I was just trying to take youth days and validate it to how true what these people were saying. However, I have good news for you. I've been keeping back the second book for a long, long time now. And that book is going to be released in November. I was going to release it in 2021. 2020, but the COVID came, the virus came, and I will just release it in November. And I am hoping that the virus would have gone, and then next year, February 7th, Independence Weekend in Grenada, I should be in Grenada and hopefully in the town of Gouyave, where the Federal Rebellion, I may add, started. Now, I don't want anyone listening to the show from the partisan Andrews.
Yes, because I know when you mentioned that comes to mind. I was in a conversation about that not so long ago.
Now, in fairness, and this is where we have to give federal credit, and the leaders, there were no clock, there were no watch. It's midnight, and it's kind of strange that the two started just as planned, basically at the same time in what is now La Bay. You know, it was not, that is where Soubise is, that was where the town was at that particular time in that area, Munich, not Munich, but in the La Bay area. So it all started in Gouyave and in what we now call Grenville. But in Gouyave were the leaders, and the new book I'm doing is going now to give a lot of facts. Now, there are people from Australia, scholars. And, you know, one thing in the scholarly world, I am not a scholar, and scholars may believe that I resent scholars. But scholars tend to give, suppose a man is doing his PhD and he's trying to prove a point. And he makes the point. Other scholars over the years will just quote this quote, and it becomes the validate an error. Right. And this is what has happened in the case of the Fedon Rebellion. So I've been doing research and research and research. And again, no one has ever written a book on Julian Fedon. Now, let me clear that matter up again. Now, the great Jamaican historian who is a citizen of Grenada, Belvedere Estate, the late Prime Minister Brizan, quite a number of people have written a chapter about Fedon in a book. Okay. Scholars have written maybe a chapter in doing the PhDs. No one really has ever written a book totally dedicated to Fedon until the first book, Belvedere Estate, Fedon's House. And if all goes well, I will release the book, you know, hopefully in November. And I want to tell the whole world, and to tell you in particular, with COVID and everything that is around, you never know when one of us will go. So in the event you hear I'm gone, make sure you find that book and publish it, because again, it will present to you hopefully an entire sort of biography of Julian Fedon. And then, but to know Julian Fedon, since there's very little information about him, you have to know what was Gouyave like in those days. Okay. And talking about that, the DeCoteau we are speaking to here, the Predums, the Dragons in Gouyave, they all were there. That family were there during the Fedon Rebellion. As a matter of fact, the first of the Fedon revolutionary to die in action was Dragon.
Okay. Wow. Speaking about Gouyave, and let's get a bit of a tongue called Gouyave. You left Gouyave many years ago, and how did you, Uncle Tony, what it is that drove you to have the desire to do that? I know you say in part it's dedicated to your mother, but what it is, because no one else has sought to do something like that and to bring to the fore the life and the culture of Gouyave in that way. What it is would have driven you to do such a book?
When I was in high school, we were required to read a book called Tom Sawyer.
Tom Sawyer, okay.
Yeah, Tom Sawyer.
I remember Tom Sawyer.
Right. That was written by an American guy called McLean. His real name, by the way, was Samuel Cleveland.
Okay.
But anyway, he uses pen name called Mark Twain to write.
Twain, yeah.
And the story he told is about the Mississippi, the great Mississippi River, traveling on it, and the shenanigans that Tom and his friend Huck did.
Huck, yeah.
Right. So I always
Huck was the black guy.
Yeah, no. Huck,
Huck was, yeah. Jim was the black guy.
Yes.
Okay.
But nonetheless, when I read that, I found so much enjoyment in reading this book. Mm-hmm. And then I said, wait a second. I live in the United States now since 79. And I'm saying, I've never yet seen the Mississippi, not even take a boat ride on it.
Okay.
I have no idea what he was talking about, except that it related to the things that I could have seen myself and my friends in Guelph doing.
Right.
Tom, as you know, was a case. I mean,
yes.
I had a friend, I would not call, I can call his name. His name was, he is now Dr. Bernard Gibbs. Back then we used to call him Cathy.
Right. I know him.
All right. Well, he would have been the Tom Sawyer of Guelph because he was that adventurous. I thought he and, you know this guy on the line, a guy we call Winston Sylvester.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
All right.
Yeah.
I think these are the two most brilliant people I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to Duray. Duray could have done anything that he wanted to. He made everything better than the next person. He made tops. Back then, we used to make skin and tops and what. He did it better than everybody else. He used to make a sailboat. He did it better than everybody else. He made kites. He did it better than everybody else. And even when I tell you, Duray, it's too bad that somebody like him was not able to capitalize on his innate ability to really establish himself, because I know you would have had him, and you should, by the way, have him on a program like this because he was that good. Bernard Gibbs now is by the way, he's sick now, and he's sick.
Okay.
He became a professor at McGill University in Montreal. He's in chemistry. So again, I'm getting back to a simple point. Mm-hmm. When we were growing up, we used to think that these things were impossible. How could he be at McGill, write a book, do this, do that, do that? Because in your mind at that time, those things seemed beyond you.
Yeah, I know.
Until you grow up and realize, I lived in Guelph, I want to read something about Guelph. I look around, there's nothing about Guelph. And then Toni Morrison's words came to my mind. You know what she said? If you can't find the book that you want to read, write it yourself. And that's what I did.
Okay.
May I just make a statement here?
Sure, no problem.
In terms of Guelph, we have to remember Guelph was once the revolutionary capital.
Mm-hmm.
It was the capital of Grenada during the Fedon's rebellion. And long before, Guelph was the most vibrant in the entire Grenada, not St. George's. As a matter of fact, in the 20th century, the early part of the 20th century, all the notables in St. George's, who's the McIntyres, the Freitas, they all came from Guelph. They all came from Guelph, and Guelph was basically the pulse, and I think it is still the pulse of Grenada. It's always vibrant, even before the Fedon's rebellion, even when the French, in other words, that is before the British conquered Grenada in 1762. So 1762, under 100% French rule, Guelph was the most vibrant place. It was the dance, and the Roman Catholic Church played a very vital role. You know, it was always there. So Guelph remains. As a matter of fact, some of your most prominent, there's a man named Hutchison who went under a book. These days, a lot of people discover who is Hutchison. And oral history is so important. So I was in Washington, and somebody lent me this book. That book has been out of existence for years. And when I read the first 2 chapters, I could have told you the rest of the man's early life. Because the man I grew up with, Frederick Adams, and Hutchinson, they all were like 4-year-old and 5-year-old. We're talking about 1910, 1912, 1915. And many on a Sunday morning when my Frederick Adams may have been in Gouyave, he was a good friend of the DeCoteaus, Piper DeCoteau, Norbert DeCoteau, and so forth. So Sunday morning when he may have had a drink or 2 in Gouyave, so Sunday morning in Belvidere, before we go on the estate to take care of the goats and everything, he will be giving us all this oral history. So Hutchinson, Gouyave, all the people, Mr. Hewitt, he was the headmaster of the Anglican school.
I've heard that name.
Before World War, he was a very, very stern apprentice headmaster. And Frederick Adams, although his mother, Miss Selena, they lived in Gouyave, his father lived in Belvedere. So when he was coming down, he heard all the banging and children having fun in the school. And Mr. Hewitt was a strict headmaster. It was 1918. The reason for all that banging and enjoyment, Mr. Hewitt was giving all the children a good life. They were just got the news that World War I
was over. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So then there is Mr. Miller, who succeeded Mr. Hewitt. Then came Eli Peters. So there's a lot of great individuals. And the funny thing enough, in my encounter a couple of years back, I met some Hewitt with some prominent African Americans. And in chatting, it was their great-great-grandfather, somebody like that, who hailed from Gouyave. So all in all, there are such glory days of Gouyave that we all could speak about. And the funny enough, we need archaeologists because some of the buildings are still there.
Yes, that building right next to the police station that I know in my day used to be owned by Mr. Gibbs.
Yes.
It is still there, and reportedly it used to be, there is some connection between that building and the Fedon story. Is there?
Right, but there are a lot of buildings, the old wall, all the old walls around. You know, there was Front Street and Down Street. You know, you could pinpoint exactly.
Yes, those buildings. Yeah, you can see the architecture down street.
Exactly.
It's definitely different to the architecture on the lands.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now I'm understanding why I had to write a piece for Gouyave, because it was in my blood all along.
Okay.
But through Mr. Hall, I'm getting to know that. Just as you said, it had to be written because it should have been written.
It should have been written.
And I don't want somebody to be reading about Gouyave, somebody who comes from England, as Mr. Hall was pointing out, or wherever they come from, writing about Gouyave. What do they know about Gouyave?